If you grew up in poverty, you know that there was no handbook waiting for us. No one sat us down and explained investing, retirement accounts, credit scores, even how to ask for a raise at work. We were expected to somehow figure out a game that no one ever taught us how to play. And today I wanted to share my story of going from a childhood of scarcity to building a stable middle-class life. And it's not because I've done everything perfectly. There are people watching who feel behind maybe. They are overwhelmed or convinced that financial stability is only for other people. I used to believe that the middle-class families had some sort of secret information that I simply didn't know and know how to access. And what I eventually learned is that they weren't necessarily smarter or more talented. It's just that they had inherited knowledge that many of us never received. So if you're someone who is trying to break out of that poverty cycle, or you've made your way into the middle class and you're just trying to survive, today I wanted to talk about the 7 poverty habits that I had to break in order to create a better life for myself. I'll share a little bit about my story. I was raised by a single mother. My parents divorced when I was about 2 years old. My mother did not receive any child support from my father, and my father was never part of my life. We lived in and out of public housing, and my mother did work full time. Money was scarce, and there was no additional funds for anything. Now, on top of, coming from poverty, I also came from a situation where my mother was very low effort and has narcissistic tendencies. And I'll share a video here that I've done talking about my low effort family. But I learned very early on that if I wanted to have a different life, I was going to have to create that life myself. Now, we were very lucky. When I was about 13 years old, my mother did meet someone. And we lived in a small town in public housing. And then when she met this man, we moved into a bigger city. And that is really what helped change our financial situation, because then we had 2 incomes. Now, even though there was someone there and a second income, it didn't really change the environment of the low effort and the narcissist. But for today's purpose, we are talking about coming out of poverty and creating a middle class life that's comfortable. So I'm going to share with you the tips, the changes that I had to make to get rid of that poverty mindset. And to this day, some of those are still really hard to get rid of, but your life will be what you create it. And I knew that if I wanted a different life, I had to make it for myself. When you grow up with financial insecurity, your brain becomes wired for survival. You focus on today's emergency because tomorrow isn't always guaranteed. And that mindset protects you when you're struggling, but some of those habits can hold you back later in life. So I'm going to talk about the 7 poverty habits that you need to change if you want to be successful in middle class. I think money insecurity is probably the biggest thing. And the feeling that if you have money, you need to spend it as soon as you have it, that it's pointless to have it sitting in the bank. And changing that mindset that it's okay to save money and not spend it is really hard. And it's also hard to get rid of the feeling that when you do have money, that it's going to disappear. I could have $1 million in the bank, and every single day I check my bank account. It's just part of what I do every day, because I'm always worried that there's not going to be money. What if I'm out shopping and there's no money? What if, I need to buy something? What if I get broken down on the side of the road and I need money? I'm always worried about money. And that's something that you may or may not ever be able to change. But the feeling that you need to spend it, that does need to change, because you do have to have a safety net, even if it's only a few dollars here and there that you can put aside. So that there's something in there in case of an emergency, something in your account that protects you, and something that eases your mind. Hi, if you're new here, I'm Lori. This is Ever After 50. I am trying to create a midlife with purpose. I am trying to redefine myself, redefine my marriage, all of the friendships that I abandoned over the years, and I'm trying to launch my young adults into the world. I hope that you'll subscribe and join the conversation in the comments. Now let's get back to this video. The second habit that you need to change is believing that debt is normal. And I think for a lot of people in poverty, debt has become part of the existence. It's how they're surviving. And I mean, the same could be said with middle class or even upper class. Everyone carries a certain amount of debt. And you have to be comfortable with a certain amount of debt if you want to get ahead. So in my case, I wanted to go to school. I wanted to go to college, and there was no one there to help me. So I decided I was going to go to school, and I used my credit cards to pay for all of my education. And there was student loans, but I didn't even know about student loans because I grew up in poverty. I didn't know what was available to me. So I chose to pay for all of my education through credit cards. But I didn't mind because I knew that education was going to serve me. That was part of the plan to change my life. And it did serve me very well because I was able to get a really good job with the education that I have. I mean, it didn't happen overnight. It did take several years for me to finally get the job that I thought was best suited for the education that I had. But being comfortable with a certain amount of debt is okay, but you also have to stop believing that debt is normal. The third habit is something that's probably weighing you down mentally all the time, and it is that you're thinking that wealthy people are simply lucky. And some are, of course, but many aren't. They've been raised in an environment where they've understood the systems. They understood the rules. They knew how to play the game, and we just didn't. A big part of breaking out of that poverty cycle is changing your mindset. Do not worry about what everybody else is doing. Oh my God, they've got it so easy. They're so lucky. If you're going to break out of that, you need to just worry about yourself, set up your own plan, and figure out how you're going to execute it. Number 4 is that you need to stop feeling guilty for your successes. Sometimes when we improve our life, we create distance with people who knew us when we were the old version of ourselves. And not all people appreciate that you've changed, that you've improved your life. And that's something that's going to naturally happen because people do change, people evolve, and not everyone's going to be happy for your success. And sometimes that's going to create separation between you, your family, some of your friends. But it's important to surround yourself with people that are like-minded, people that also have aspirations, they have goals, they're successful. Because it's kind of like the analogy of when you have, a fruit tree and one of the branches is dead. That branch is going to poison the rest of the tree and potentially kill the entire tree. So you have to surround yourself with people that are going to keep that tree blooming. And my husband will appreciate this because this was one of his analogies. The 5th point is that you don't need to avoid having financial conversations. You can't improve what you're afraid to discuss. And the biggest part of evolving into middle class is that you need to educate yourself, read, watch videos, learn about the different things that are going on in the middle class. Most people travel, investing, buying homes, art, theater. Just read up and familiarize yourself with those things. And don't be afraid to have these conversations. The 6th habit is that you need to stop believing that every single setback means that you're a failure. There have been so many side roads and hiccups along the way to get me to where I am today. And if every time something bad happened, I thought that I was a complete failure, I wouldn't be where I am today. You have to pick yourself up, get back on the road, keep driving. There were so many times where, I worked a crappy job that I hated. I couldn't pay rent. I was scrambling, trying to find money to pay rent. I would sacrifice on food, sacrifice on clothes because I had to try to do it all on my own. And, the education was the biggest thing, the most important thing, and being willing to make sacrifices. If you don't want to make sacrifices, you're not going to get anywhere. And I also was willing to take risks. When I did finally get my job that I've been working at for the last 26 years, I called the company and I said, I will take anything. I already had a job. I hated it. I was paying rent. I couldn't afford where I was living. And I took the chance, took the risk, and called and said, I will take anything, even, a 6-week temp job. I'm a rule follower. I'm always trying to plan ahead. So this was terrifying for me, thinking that, okay, what if after 6 weeks, what am I going to do? I won't be having a job. How am I going to pay for everything? But I took a chance. And that chance that I took catapulted me, basically, because that was the beginning of a very fruitful career. And, with that career, eventually I met my husband, we started a life, and things sort of evolved from there. But if you're not willing to take risks and chances, you're not really going to get anywhere. The 7th habit is that you need to stop thinking that it's too late. No matter what your age, it's never too late to make changes. You just have to be willing to put yourself out there, take risks, work hard. Sometimes you might have to work that crappy job that you don't want. You might have to work 2, 3 jobs. You have to sacrifice all the fancy things that you want in life, because those things can come later. Once you get to the point where you are comfortable financially and you've got money coming in and you've established yourself. But it's never too late to make the changes to try to improve your life and get yourself out of poverty. And what no one talks about is that there are struggles, because you have this guilt of having more money than your family has. And there's a pressure to financially help everyone else around you. And then also, the biggest fear is that it could all disappear tomorrow. You're also caught between 2 worlds, and you don't really relate anymore to where you came from. And that experience is more common than what people realize. And often there's emotional aftermath of growing up with all of this instability. And financial trauma doesn't always disappear when the bank account improves. It's something that you're always going to be thinking about and worrying about. And sometimes healing takes a lot longer than earning money does. What's helped me is to build an emergency fund, learn financial skills, create boundaries around helping other people, accept that stability is something that you've earned, and allow myself to enjoy the life that I worked so hard to build and that my husband also worked so hard to build. If you've climbed from poverty into the middle class, you're carrying more than a paycheck. You're carrying the weight of changing your family's trajectory, and that's something that you should be proud of. If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope that you will join the conversation in the comments, and I hope that you've already subscribed. And until next time, bye for now.